Hello and welcome to Spill the Tea. True Stories, the place where real life is more fascinating than fiction. Sit back, pour yourself a cup of tea, and let's dive into the moments that stay with us forever. We're starting now. 20-year-old Alex sped down the empty highway. He had only recently gotten his license, but he had learned to drive when he was still a teenager. His first teacher was his father. They used to drive together on these very deserted roads when they came to Meadowbrook Village to visit his grandmother. And now Alex was driving from his grandmother's, but no longer alone, and he felt grown up, free, independent. A wonderful feeling. Music blared in the cabin, the trunk was packed full of gifts. Alex had come to Meadowbrook Village to help his beloved grandmother with the garden. He felt sorry for the elderly relative. She was so old, all dried up, barely holding on, but she just couldn't part with a lifelong habit. Year after year she sowed the beds, tended the plantings, and by autumn, harvested the crop. And she categorically refused to move to Riverton City, closer to her adult children and grandchildren. So the relatives took turns visiting the old woman, helping, talking, exchanging news. After getting his license and a car, a black used Lada Priora, Alex began visiting his grandmother more often than others. There were several reasons for this, and each seemed significant to him. Firstly, as the youngest grandchild, the only boy among 6 sisters and cousins, he had always been his grandmother's favorite. A special bond had long existed between them. They understood each other without words. Near his grandmother, Alex still felt warm and cozy, just like in childhood. There are Mama's boys, but he was a grandma's grandson, and he was proud of it. Secondly, she lived in Meadowbrook Village, the beautiful Sophie, the daughter of his grandmother's neighbors. In childhood, she had seemed to Alex like a nasty, unpleasant girl, skinny, pale, always complaining to her parents about the noisy boys, a group Alex was part of back then. The boys tried to get revenge on the tattletale at every opportunity. Sometimes they threw dry berries at her back, sometimes they invented hurtful taunts. They shouted them right in the girl's face, enjoying her reaction. That's how their childhood passed, full of minor mischief and grudges. But one day, when he came to visit his grandmother for the holidays, Alex realized that everything had changed. Sophie had transformed from an awkward teenager into a beautiful young woman, and her character had changed too. She no longer complained about the boys or looked at them with contempt. Sophie made witty jokes, laughed cheerfully, and there was always something to talk about with her. She danced at the discos in the village club, attracting everyone's attention. In short, on the eve of his last year of school, Alex realized he was in love and began showing the girl signs of attention. Sometimes he'd give her a bouquet of wildflowers. Sometimes he'd give her a ride to the post office on his bike. Sometimes he'd help carry a bucket from the well, hoping for a reciprocal smile. But Alex turned out to be just one of Sophie's many admirers. He had too many rivals. The girl clearly preferred David, a guy from the next street over. This fact, it seemed, only further fueled Alex's feelings, making him desire her more strongly. He decided to fight for his love, which he had been doing ever since, for almost 4 years now. Sophie, like him, enrolled in university after school. But David stayed in Meadowbrook Village. His father was seriously ill, and his mother couldn't cope with caring for her husband and the household alone. Without their eldest son, the family would have had a truly hard time, so the guy stayed home. He got a job and continued to help his family cope with the difficult situation. Sophie came home every weekend, and the first thing she did was run to her boyfriend. She missed him during the week and eagerly awaited these meetings. Their short dates were a breath of fresh air for her. Alex thought he had all the cards now. David was there, in Meadowbrook Village, while he, Alex, was in Riverton City, right next to Sophie. Plus, he'd gotten his license, and his father had even given him a car after that. An enviable catch. Who could resist? But Sophie continued to treat Alex as just a friend. nothing more. Her heart belonged to David. Alex couldn't understand the beauty's choice and refused to accept that she preferred someone else to him. He continued to persistently pursue Sophie's affection, ignoring her obvious reluctance. "You're good, very good," the girl had told him more than once. "You'll find your love yet. You'll fall for someone. Look around, there are so many beautiful girls." "I only need you," Alex stubbornly insisted, not listening to her arguments. He was sure that sooner or later she would realize that he was her destiny. "But that's impossible," Sophie shrugged, looking at him with pity. "David and I are getting married soon." Alex tried to convince the girl she was making a big mistake, showering her with bouquets of roses and gifts. At some point, she simply stopped accepting them. He even stalked her. He hated David, with whom he had played a lot in childhood. He pointed out his rival's obvious flaws to Sophie, but nothing helped. After studying for 2 years in Riverton City, the girl transferred to distance learning. She did this to be near David and help him care for his father. This was something Alex simply couldn't comprehend. It seemed like the height of madness to him. His feelings for Sophie just wouldn't cool down. The girl was right. There were always many beautiful girls around Alex, but for some reason, none of them attracted his attention. He saw only her, the one and only. Alex often went to his grandmother's because of Sophie, too. To see her even from a distance, to admire her walk, her long, dark, shiny hair, her huge green eyes. That alone was happiness for him. It was a shame the girl didn't talk to him at all now. She even seemed to be afraid of him. She tried to keep her distance, avoiding any contact. He had definitely gone too far with his persistent courtship, he admitted to himself, of course. But Alex wasn't planning on giving up even now. A truly insidious plan was brewing in his mind. The guy decided to approach it from David's side. He planned to show up at David's work sometime during the week with a couple of his friends, strong guys with bats, and have a serious talk. If he could scare David and force him to break up with Sophie, who knows? Maybe then the girl would pay attention to him. After all, she'd need support, involvement, and he, at the right moment, would of course be there, happy to offer his shoulder. This was exactly what Alex was thinking about now, pressing the gas pedal to the floor. The road was smooth, empty. He could speed up. The guy felt like he wasn't driving, but flying over the ground. The forest pressed in on both sides of the road. The leaves were already starting to yellow. Soon the trees would be dressed in gold and crimson. Alex hoped that by then, Sophie would finally be his. Of course, the guy understood that his plan, to put it mildly, reeked of villainy. But he believed that in love, all's fair. Sophie had to be his, period. Alex had been used to getting what he wanted since childhood. It had always been that way. Suddenly, the guy noticed a small dark dot in the distance. It separated from the forest and was rapidly approaching the highway. Alex slowed down, becoming alert. Maybe it was some animal crossing the road, a large one, judging by its size. Dusk was already gathering. It was hard to make out anything ahead. The distance between Alex's car and the strange object kept decreasing. Soon the guy realized it wasn't an animal at all. A child was standing on the side of the road. This was unbelievable. It was about 50 kilometers to the nearest Meadowbrook village and the same distance to Riverton City. This was a deserted place. How did a little kid end up here? Was he lost, or had something terrible happened? Alex stopped next to the child, opened the door. He looked at the boy carefully. The kid was clearly in a state of shock. A disheveled, frightened boy who looked about 10, shaking violently. His clothes were crumpled and torn in several places, his face pale from the horror he had experienced. The child's face seemed vaguely familiar to Alex. "What happened?" he asked the boy. The kid tried to answer, but only a choked wheeze escaped his throat. Alex understood. It was from the fear he had experienced. He was scared to death. "What happened?" The guy repeated his question, trying to make his voice as soft and friendly as possible. And then the boy burst into tears, tears streaming down his face. He cried, trembling all over, although he was clearly trying to hold back the sobs tearing from his chest so as not to appear weak. Alex's heart ached with pity for this frightened child. The poor thing was lost, probably terrified being alone. The guy walked up to the boy and did something that was, generally speaking, not his style. He hugged the kid tightly, pulling him close. The child immediately went limp in his embrace and cried even harder. Alex stroked the boy's head and kept repeating that everything would be all right now, that it was all over, trying to calm him down. "No, it's not over!" The boy suddenly looked him straight in the eyes. "Mom's there! Uncle Frank is keeping her locked up, and now that I've run away, he'll kill her." What? An unpleasant shiver ran down Alex's spine. The theory of a boy lost in the forest, which had fit so neatly in his head, fell apart after these words from the foundling. Everything was much more serious, if the boy was telling the truth, of course. "He took us away and kept us in a cage for a long time. Mom helped me escape, but he came back when I was leaving. I heard him approaching the woodland sanctuary. Now Mom will have a hard time because of me. He'll be angry." Woodland sanctuary. Cages. Alex couldn't yet understand what had happened there, but it all sounded terrifying. The guy realized he himself was in danger. What if the mysterious Uncle Frank ran out onto the road after the child, noticing his absence? "Let's call the police," Alex suggested to the frightened boy. "They'll come. You'll tell them everything, okay?" "Yes, just hurry." The boy was in a panic, his voice trembling with fear. He was clearly very worried about his loved one, literally beside himself with fear. Alex looked at the child more closely. Large gray eyes, a slightly upturned nose, a scattering of freckles on his tanned face. Of course. The guy remembered where he had seen this boy. Just a couple of weeks ago, a woman and child had disappeared in Riverton City. They had gone to the cinema and then hadn't returned home, and they were searched for everywhere. All the lampposts were plastered with their photos, and these pictures kept appearing online. And then the news, as always happens in such cases, lost its relevance. A school burned down in Riverton City and a major incident occurred, and now everyone was only talking about those events. The search for the woman and child continued, but it no longer attracted as much interest as before, fading into the background. And now, standing before Alex, was that very boy, whose photos had been so frequently seen everywhere recently. The guy even remembered his name. "Is your name Leo?" Alex clarified. "Yes," the boy nodded. "Call the police quickly. Mom doesn't have much time. He'll get angry." Without losing time, Alex dialed the necessary numbers and briefly explained the situation to the dispatcher who answered the call. He asked them to send a unit because a woman, the mother of the boy he had found on the road, was presumably in danger in the forest. The guy could only explain his location approximately, but he was assured that his cell signal had already been tracked and pinpointed, so they would be found. All that remained was to wait for help to arrive. Alex invited the boy into the car. The child settled into the passenger seat next to the driver. "Maybe you want some chocolate?" Alex remembered he had an untouched bar in the glove compartment. Leo shook his head negatively. It was understandable. He wasn't in the mood for chocolate now. Alex saw that the boy was in a terrible state from the stress he had experienced and his anxiety for his mother. The guy really wanted to distract the child with something, to make him feel better, but he didn't know what to do in such situations, so he just sat silently beside him, hugging Leo's thin shoulders. Despite his young age, the boy was a real hero. He managed to escape, find his way in the forest, run out to the road, and call for help. His bravery amazed Alex. Alex looked over Leo's head at the trees from which he had emerged onto the highway. What if that very Uncle Frank was watching them from there right now, waiting for the moment to pounce? Alex remained on alert the whole time. If anything happened, he'd floor it and speed away from this dangerous place. Finally, flashing lights appeared in the distance. The police! Alex breathed a sigh of relief. Only now did he realize how tense he had been all this time. 2 patrol cars and a Gazelle van with a small squad pulled up. They were wearing helmets and bulletproof vests, tall, strong, dangerous looking. Uncle Frank definitely wouldn't be able to handle guys like that. "See? Everything will be all right now." Alex clapped Leo encouragingly on the back. The boy looked at the people in uniform with hopeful eyes. 2 men in plain clothes led the boy aside. They asked the child questions, probably clarifying the details of the story, trying to be as delicate as possible. They also pinpointed the location of the woodland sanctuary where Leo's mother remained, to begin the search immediately. Finally, the people hurried into the forest, while Leo, Alex, and a few policemen remained on the road. All they could do was wait, peering intently into the dark thicket. Alex watched the boy, who didn't take his eyes off the forest, waiting to see his mother. A woman in uniform approached Alex and introduced herself as a police captain. She informed him that she needed to take his statement. The guy nodded, understanding that he was now an integral part of this entire story. He couldn't just leave. His role had turned out to be significant. Time dragged on endlessly. An ambulance arrived and Leo was taken inside. The doctors probably needed to examine him and make sure he was okay. "No, I'm not going anywhere," the boy's voice suddenly rang out. "I'm not going anywhere without Mom." Alex understood that they wanted to take Leo to the hospital, but he couldn't leave until he knew his mother was all right. And Alex perfectly understood the boy, his anxiety. The child jumped out of the car and ran up to him. Alex took Leo's hand. They stood together on the roadside and looked into the forest. It seemed calm, impassive, completely ordinary, hiding its secrets. Alex had driven past this place many times during the 2 weeks the boy and his mother had spent in the woodland sanctuary. He couldn't even imagine that somewhere behind the trees, so close by, something so terrible was happening. The thought sent shivers down his spine. Finally, the police appeared. First came those in helmets and bulletproof vests. They walked quickly towards their Gazelle van. Their mission was accomplished. 2 strong guys were leading a man, plump, in a stretched-out red sweater and sweatpants with baggy knees. Alex realized this was the infamous Uncle Frank, but he couldn't make out his face. The man's hands were cuffed behind his back, forcing him to walk practically bent in half. He looked broken and pathetic. The boy squeezed Alex's hand tighter. He watched the man in the sweater with a frightened gaze until he was pushed into the Gazelle van. Finally, his tormentor was caught. The vehicle was already pulling away when 2 more policemen emerged from the forest. They were helping a slender woman with large gray eyes, just like Leo's, walk. It was his mother, alive and unharmed. "Thank God she's alive!" Leo rushed towards the woman, hugging her tightly around the waist. She wrapped her arms around her son's shoulders. Both of them sank into the grass and just sat there, silently looking at each other, unable to believe they were saved. The policemen didn't bother them. They understood everything perfectly, giving them time. Alex watched the reunion of mother and son, his heart overflowing with a variety of feelings. The guy didn't immediately notice the tears rolling down his cheeks. The emotions that had overwhelmed him all this time had finally found an outlet. The tension had eased. So much had happened right before his eyes. It was simply incredible. Right before Alex's eyes, the plot of a thrilling thriller had unfolded. Only here, everything was real. The story ended well, but the realization of what could have happened sent a chill down his heart. He had witnessed a miracle. The woman and boy got up from the grass, together, embracing, accompanied and supported by the police, and walked towards the ambulance. As they passed Alex, Leo touched his hand and quietly said, "Thank you." Alex just shook his head. What thanks could there be? And what had he actually done? He just called the police, that's all. Nothing heroic. And then the guy met the gaze of the woman, the boy's mother. A beautiful face, regular features, and a smile. A wonderful, gentle smile. Looking at her, it was hard to believe that this woman had endured so many trials. She had been held captive for several weeks and had just been in mortal danger, but it was completely unclear from her appearance. Alex suddenly felt a strong urge to talk to her, to find out what had happened, to ask if she and the boy needed his help. But the woman and Leo were already being led to the ambulance. As she entered the cabin, Leo's mother suddenly turned back to Alex and smiled at him. The guy felt as if he had been struck by lightning from head to toe. It seemed this smile made a greater impression on him than the story of the rescue itself. Alex understood that he would often remember this episode. It would remain in his memory forever. Riverton City was stirred once again by a story that had already begun to fade. The woman and boy, Sarah and Leo, were found. What happened to them was a ready-made plot for a thriller, a horrifying reality. Mother and son had become victims of Frank, a man with a psychiatric diagnosis. Many acquaintances of this man didn't even suspect he was ill. Frank had friends and a job. He led the life of an ordinary person. True, the 36-year-old man lived with his mother and didn't have a girlfriend. But that wasn't so strange these days. It happens, and no one paid it any mind. Apparently, Frank saw Sarah's photo on social media and fell in love with the beautiful woman. The presence of a child didn't stop him. He was obsessed. The man tried to start a relationship with the beauty. He wrote her long confessions of his feelings, waited for her with flowers outside her building. But Sarah, first politely and then categorically, asked him to leave her alone, sensing something was wrong. Frank couldn't accept this. Whether it was his character or a consequence of his illness, the man was determined to get what he wanted. He set up a woodland sanctuary in the forest, prepared everything meticulously, even insulating the walls. He planned to keep his captives there in winter, too. His plan was thought out to the smallest detail. And then he took Sarah and Leo away when they were returning from the cinema. Mother and son were searched for everywhere. Even theories about them being taken to another country were considered. And all this time they were very close by, just a few dozen kilometers from home. "He kept us in cages," Sarah shared in an interview. "He didn't touch us, didn't hit us, didn't threaten us, nothing like that. He brought food, cared for us in his own way, talked to us a lot. But of course we were afraid of him. His gaze was frightening. I realized this man was unwell and capable of anything. So as soon as I had the chance, I helped my son escape. He brought help, and we were saved." Sarah and Leo became famous. They even flew to Grandview City for a talk show. Their story was now known throughout the country. Alex was also invited to these shows and interviews. Of course, since he was the one who found the frightened boy on the road. But the guy refused. He didn't want all that fuss around himself. He watched Sarah, looked at her photos, admired her on screen. Yes, one could understand Frank. There was something very captivating about this woman. Not just external beauty, which was certainly present, but also charm, allure, charisma, something intangible. And then, after a few weeks, this amazing story, as usually happens, was forgotten, faded into the background. New topics for talk shows and scandalous articles appeared. Life returned to its usual course. And then, about a month after everything happened, Sarah suddenly wrote to Alex in a messenger app. She must have gotten his number from the police. The woman thanked the guy for his help and suggested meeting to discuss everything that had happened, to express her gratitude. Of course, Alex gladly agreed. He really wanted to see this woman, hear her voice, learn about everything that had happened firsthand. After all, unlike other ordinary people, the guy understood perfectly that he would never forget this story. He often recalled Sarah's smile directed at him, and his feelings from it. Something had changed within him. And sometimes he dreamed of Leo, just as the boy had emerged from the forest. Disheveled, frightened, all rumpled and dirty. Alex really wanted to know how the boy was doing now, if he was okay. The boy didn't participate in talk shows. There was almost no mention of him in articles. Obviously, Sarah was protecting her son from excessive attention. Well, one could understand her. She was protecting him. At the appointed time, Alex arrived at the restaurant where Sarah had arranged the meeting. He saw her immediately. She was sitting at a table in the far corner. The woman was looking thoughtfully out the window. She seemed calm. Long chestnut hair framed a narrow face with regular features. A dark turtleneck and tight jeans emphasized her graceful figure. Beautiful, composed, somehow slightly detached, she attracted attention. Seeing this woman, some strange, unclear feelings stirred within Alex. Nothing romantic, although Sarah's appearance was quite conducive to such impulses. Alex still only dreamed of Sophie, but Sarah clearly attracted him, intrigued him, occupied his thoughts with her story. "Good afternoon," Alex said politely, approaching. A strange awkwardness suddenly overcame him, something that hadn't happened in a long time. And when the woman turned her gaze of incredible gray eyes on him, the guy even seemed to blush. That hadn't happened to him when interacting with the opposite sex in a long time. He was surprised by his reaction. "Hello," Sarah smiled charmingly, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Finally, I can thank you in person." "But I didn't do anything special. I just called the police," Alex replied modestly. "But your son is a real hero. He showed incredible bravery." "Well, how to put it?" Sarah's face clouded over. "Leo. He had run out to the road in a different place before he met you. He saw 2 or 3 cars, waved his hands, attracted attention, called for help. But they drove past. They didn't stop. But you stopped, and that saved us." Alex shook his head in shock. He simply couldn't wrap his head around something like that. How could someone ignore a small child's plea for help? He could understand if people were scared of an adult man on a deserted highway, but a boy, a 10-year-old child, it seemed unthinkable to him. Sarah seemed to read his thoughts. "It's not surprising," she said. "People don't need extra problems. Who knows? Maybe they thought the child was bait, that they wouldn't stop, and a gang would jump out of the forest. Or they were afraid of something else. There are many reasons. But you? If you hadn't stopped, who knows what he would have done to me." "Seeing that Leo managed to get away, he started behaving very strangely," Sarah continued. "I had never seen him like that before. He was furious and desperate." Sarah started talking about him, about Frank. She didn't look like a victim at all. In her gray eyes, Alex noticed contempt, hatred, but not fear. There wasn't a shadow of the horror she had experienced, only cold determination. It seemed Sarah was either a surprisingly strong woman or an excellent actress. She skillfully hid her true feelings. "He didn't harm you?" Alex asked. This question had bothered him all these weeks. In the numerous interviews, it was tactfully omitted. Sarah only spoke about being held captive with her son in cages, without going into detail. Frank's woodland sanctuary was even shown in one of the reports. Alex saw these cages, essentially, just a part of a room fenced off with bars, with a partition. The boy was in the smaller compartment, Sarah in the larger one. It was terrifying and hard to comprehend that a mother and son had been in such conditions for several weeks. "Well, how to put it?" Sarah thought about the question. "Physically, no, he never hit us, didn't even touch us. He wanted to win my affection peacefully, behaved like a suitor. He talked to us a lot, to me, tried to please me, was persistent. He even sometimes brought my son and me dinner from an expensive restaurant. Only I could see. His patience was wearing thin every day. He became more irritable, angrier, even crazier in his speeches. The climax was not far off. I felt it in every cell of my body." An unpleasant chill ran down Alex's spine at these words. He suddenly felt how defenseless and powerless Sarah must have felt in the woodland sanctuary, how she feared what might happen to her, and most importantly, to her son. "You asked if he harmed us," Sarah continued. "Physically? No, of course not. He didn't lay a finger on us. But how this incident will affect my son's psyche and character, even doctors don't know. It's a big trauma." "How is he?" Alex asked. Leo's fate interested him greatly. The guy worried about the boy, hoping he was okay and would cope. "He seems to be doing better now, but Leo still goes to a psychologist. These sessions help, of course, but they can't completely erase what he went through. It's just that sometimes my son wakes up at night. He dreams of something terrible. True, he tells me he doesn't remember his dreams, but I see how frightened he is. So of course this whole situation has left a mark on him, a deep and painful one. And for that, and only for that, I hate Frank. If it weren't for what's happening with Leo now, I would even feel sorry for him. A sick man, strong feelings, he couldn't handle them. And besides, he sincerely believed he was doing what was best for himself and for me. In his sick mind, that's how it was." "What?" Alex couldn't believe his ears. Sarah had just felt sorry for Frank. In interviews, she had presented herself completely differently, seeming strong and uncompromising. "Maybe I'm partly to blame myself," Sarah continued. "I saw that he fell in love with me at first sight. I didn't need him myself. He wasn't my type of man at all. But like any woman, I liked to flatter my vanity. His attention was pleasant. So sometimes I smiled at him. Sometimes I met his gaze, playing this game. His reaction was pleasant to me. He blushed so sweetly, became embarrassed, and his eyes literally lit up with joy and delight. Knowing that you make someone lose their mind, your self-esteem soars to the heavens from that. It's important for any woman, especially after another failed romance, when you feel inadequate." "But I read that this Frank, that he saw it on social media." "That's just an interesting story for the press, and a cautionary one too. It teaches young people to be more careful with online dating. It sounds plausible." "In reality, it wasn't like that at all, or rather, not exactly as the journalists wrote. Will you tell me?" Alex asked, wanting to know the truth. Sarah smiled. "Let's use you," she suggested. "I understand I'm about 10 years older than you, but when you use the formal you, I feel like a real old woman, as if I'm your teacher or an elderly neighbor, and I'm not like that." Alex nodded and slightly rephrased his question. "So, will you tell me?" he repeated, looking into her eyes. His interest was genuine. "To you? Well, I have to talk to someone. Looking at you, I'm somehow sure you won't take this story to the press or gossip about it everywhere. You seem like a reliable person." "No, of course not. I just want to know how it happened. I think about it a lot. About you, about Leo," Alex confessed. "It's not surprising, since you also became a part of this story, a significant character. Of course, I'll tell you everything, if you have the time, because it will be long, very long." Alex assured her he was ready to listen until morning. He was genuinely interested in learning the truth. And the woman began her story, delving into memories of the past. Sarah became a mother early. After her 3rd year of university, she went to the sea for the first time without her parents, with friends from university. The beach, night discos, fun, drinking, all the delights of student life. In short, that's where Sarah fell in love for the first time. And with whom? With an adult man, about 15 years older than her. But he was so handsome, also erudite and gallant. And importantly, he had money, which gave him opportunities. No, Sarah was never mercenary, but money allowed Robert to court her beautifully. Restaurants, expensive attractions, gifts, all this, combined with the man's charisma, completely turned young Sarah's head. The man didn't hide that he was married. He had come to the resort town on a business trip. Some important conference was taking place there. Sarah, of course, was a little upset at first, but then decided to let whatever happen, happen. The main thing was that they were good together right here and now. They needed to enjoy the moment. They shouldn't let thoughts of something serious and insurmountable cloud these wonderful days, she decided. True, the evening before saying goodbye to Robert, the girl couldn't hold back and cried. She knew perfectly well that the man would fly back to his distant city, to his wife and children, tomorrow, and they would never see each other again. This thought was unbearable. Sarah would be without his blue eyes with a sly squint and charming smile, without Robert's gentle, strong hands, his scent, which made her heart sweetly stop and her head spin. "But don't. We had such a good time." Robert awkwardly stroked Sarah's back. Calming crying girls was clearly not Robert's forte. The man couldn't find the words to comfort his young lover. "Give me your phone number. I'll call you sometimes just to hear your voice." In reality, Sarah dreamed of more. She hoped that over time Robert would realize how strong his feelings for her were. But for that, there needed to be some communication, even if by phone, a little hope. That's unnecessary. Robert tried very hard to make his voice sound soft and gentle, but the girl felt that he immediately tensed up after her request. "Everything that happened here will stay here. A resort romance, that's how it is, and no continuation." Sarah looked up at the man who, just a moment ago, had seemed like the best man in the world to her. He said that phrase, resort romance, in such a way that the girl immediately understood. For Robert, this was a common occurrence, and she herself was far from being his only girl, just one of his fleeting infatuations. It was as if Sarah's eyes were opened. She saw reality. The girl found the strength to break free from his embrace, turn proudly, and leave. Of course, it was a bitter disappointment for her. Her first love turned out to be a deception. But Sarah coped, survived the pain, and moved on. Only, as it turned out later, this wasn't the end of the story. Returning home, the girl realized she was expecting a child. That was the real shock, seeing 2 lines on the test. Sarah was probably seriously frightened for the first time in her life. Her heart was gripped by icy fear. What to do now? So much was unknown ahead. And yet Sarah firmly decided for herself that she would have this child. That's how she got Leo. In the maternity ward, holding the tiny warm being in her arms, Sarah understood. It had all been worth it. The arguments with her parents, the misunderstandings with friends, the difficult pregnancy, everything paled before this miracle. Here he was, her gift, looking at her with trusting gray eyes, and she was the whole world to him. Of course, Sarah's father and mother helped her greatly. They supported her physically and financially at a time when their daughter was so defenseless and vulnerable. Of course, she had to endure their lectures and sermons, which seemed endless. They just couldn't understand that Sarah was now an adult, a mother herself. To them, she remained a little foolish girl. Therefore, as soon as she had the opportunity, Sarah rented an apartment for herself and Leo. The girl transferred to distance learning, got a job, and moved out of her family home. At this moment, the woman finally felt completely free and independent. Life took on new colors, full of hopes and plans. Leo grew up. Every day he became more independent and sensible. Sarah could now talk to him about all sorts of topics, like an adult. Mother and son cared for each other and enjoyed life to the fullest, both together and each in their own way, cherishing every moment. Sarah started seeing friends. She periodically had romances. The woman wasn't planning anything serious for herself yet. She was happy just with her son. She and Leo lived well together. She didn't want to let anyone else into their harmonious, cozy world. Romantic relationships were necessary for Sarah to boost her mood. Thanks to men, their compliments, signs of attention, and admiring glances, she felt like a woman. Beautiful. Attractive. She needed this like air to heal old wounds. Apparently, the old trauma from meeting Robert still had an effect. Sarah had truly fallen in love with him then, with all her soul and heart, and he had made the young girl feel like one of many, a fleeting infatuation. So now Sarah strove to feel unique, the only one needed. This is what played a cruel trick on her with Frank. The woman met him in a group of friends who were participating in interesting quiz games in Riverton City. People, friends, acquaintances formed small teams. Then a meeting was organized somewhere in a restaurant or cinema, and a host gave interesting tasks. Sometimes they had to guess movies from dialogues, or songs or artists from descriptions. There were many challenges, and they were all fun, intriguing, unexpected. Sarah liked discussing options with like-minded people, looking for solutions, even arguing. Their team never won prizes, but they didn't end up at the bottom of the list either. The core of the team was constant. The ideological inspirer and leader of the group was Helen, Sarah's colleague, who had gotten her hooked on quizzes. With her were always the unchanging, silent neighbor Martha and her husband Paul, and the other participants changed periodically, coming when they could. Sarah mostly knew these people. They were acquaintances, relatives, and colleagues of someone from the core team, Helen, Martha, or Paul. Occasionally, newcomers joined the team. Some of them didn't stay. Or conversely, they turned into regulars at the quiz meetings, becoming part of the group. Frank became such a newcomer. Seeing an unfamiliar face at another game, Sarah, of course, was interested. The man looked a bit older than her, plump, short curly hair, a bright shirt, colorful shorts, a fleshy nose, small, attentive eyes. There was something slightly effeminate, awkward, and amusing about his appearance. In short, he was somehow awkward, amusing, but seemingly harmless. He looked like either a hamster or a Pekingese. He brought a smile to her face. Usually in movies, such people have an easygoing nature and a sense of humor. Frank indeed showed himself to be kind and cheerful. He joked a lot. He joked a lot, guessed most of the answers, pulling the team up to a respectable 4th place. He was a pleasant, easy person to talk to. Sarah, of course, couldn't help but notice the impression she made on him. Frank, when he thought no one was watching, literally devoured Sarah with his eyes, openly admired her, looked her over. Sometimes their eyes met accidentally, and then the man immediately looked away and, it seemed, became embarrassed. His reaction was obvious. It was pleasant, although Frank didn't attract Sarah romantically, not at all. She liked a different type, like James, with whom Sarah had broken up just the other day. She was still upset about it because he had ended their relationship for someone else. A young, beautiful girl with long legs and a tiny waist. Sarah had seen her. A beauty, of course. Nothing to say. Again, the woman felt rejected and heartbroken. An unpleasant feeling when you are dumped. James. Sarah had been happy with him, but she hadn't.